was rush hour in the Yao city, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Jackets brushed against jackets, bags bumped into legs, and the air grew thick with the smell of coffee, sweat, and damp fabric. Jake Miller stood near the door, clinging to one of the overhead poles, as the train lurched forward. He wasn't a tall man, but his presence was hard to ignore. His loud voice cut through the hum of conversations around him. Jake loved to talk, about himself mostly, and he didn't care who heard him. Today, he was complaining about his boss to two coworkers who had reluctantly joined him on the ride home. "He doesn't know what he's doing," Jake said, shaking his head dramatically. "I've been working there for 5 years and I'm still stuck answering phones while these new guys get promotions. It's ridiculous." One of his coworkers mumbled something vague in response, clearly more interested in staring at his phone than engaging in the conversation. The other coworker nodded half-heartedly, trying to keep her distance from Jake without being too obvious. She shifted slightly, hoping the crowd would swallow her up so she wouldn't have to listen anymore. But Jake wasn't done. He leaned closer to them, raising his voice even louder. "And can you believe how slow this train is? Every single day it's the same thing. Why do we even pay taxes if they can't fix the damn subway?" His rant was interrupted by a sudden jolt as the train hit a rough patch of track. Everyone stumbled, grabbing onto whatever they could to steady themselves. Jake reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against someone standing next to him. That someone was Emily Carter. Emily had been quietly standing by the door, holding a small leather bag close to her chest. She wore a simple black coat and jeans, her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Her face was calm, almost serene, despite the chaos around her. Unlike many of the passengers, she didn't seem annoyed by the delays or the noise. In fact, she looked like she might actually enjoy the anonymity of the crowded train. When Jake's arm collided with hers, she turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze for just a moment. There was no anger in her expression, only mild curiosity. But Jake didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. Instead of apologizing, he frowned and snapped, "Hey, watch where you're going." The words came out sharp and loud, drawing the attention of several nearby passengers. Some glanced over curiously, others pretended not to hear, keeping their eyes glued to their phones or books. Emily didn't say anything at first. She simply stared at him, her brown eyes narrowing. "Ever so slightly, what?" Jake barked, his tone defensive. "You heard me. Don't just stand there like you didn't do anything wrong." Emily finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Actually, I think it was you who bumped into me. Maybe you should be more careful." Jake blinked, caught off guard by her composure. Most people would have either apologized profusely or backed down immediately when faced with his aggressive attitude. But Emily didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed amused by his reaction. "Oh, come on," Jake scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Don't give me that. You're probably just looking for an excuse to start drama." At this point, a few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young woman sitting nearby shifted awkwardly in her seat, unsure whether to intervene. An older man with gray hair shook his head disapprovingly, muttering under his breath about how rude some people could be. But no one stepped in to stop what happened next. Jake, emboldened by the lack of resistance, took a step closer to Emily. His face twisted into a sneer as he raised his hand, and then, before anyone could react, he slapped her lightly on the arm. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was enough to make Emily take a step back, her eyebrows shooting up in surprise. For a moment, the entire train seemed to freeze. The low murmur of conversations stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels felt quieter somehow. All eyes were on Jake and Emily now, waiting to see what would happen next. Emily didn't scream or cry. She didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she gave Jake a long, piercing look, a look that made him feel smaller than he'd ever felt before. Then, without saying a word, she turned away and moved further down the car, disappearing into the sea of faces. Jake watched her go, a strange mix of satisfaction and unease washing over him. He crossed his arms and muttered to his coworkers, "See, people need to learn to respect boundaries. Neither of them responded. They exchanged a glance, silently agreeing that Jake had gone too far this time. But neither of them dared to say it out loud. As the train continued its journey, Emily found a spot near the far end of the car. She leaned against the wall, pulling out her phone and scrolling absent-mindedly through her messages. On the surface, she appeared unfazed by the incident, but inside her mind was racing. She knew exactly who she was and who her husband was, and she couldn't help but wonder, what would Vin Diesel do? Part 2. The train finally arrived at its destination, and the passengers spilled out onto the platform like water breaking through a dam. Jake Miller was one of the first to step off, eager to put some distance between himself and the crowded car. He didn't give much thought to the woman he had slapped, Emily Carter, or the strange tension that had filled the air after his outburst. To him, it was just another day, another minor annoyance in a world full of inconveniences. As Jake walked toward the exit, his two co-workers trailed behind him, their steps quick and deliberate. Neither of them said a word, but the awkward silence spoke volumes. They wanted nothing more than to escape Jake's orbit as soon as possible. One of them mumbled something about needing to catch a different train, then veered off without waiting for a response. The other followed suit moments later, leaving Jake alone on the escalator leading up to the street. Jake didn't notice, or care, that his companions had abandoned him. His mind was already racing ahead to the evening plans he had lined up. He'd meet his friends at their usual bar, order a round of drinks and regale them with tales of his day. Maybe he'd even throw in a dramatic reenactment of the train incident, complete with exaggerated gestures and over-the-top dialogue. After all, Jake loved an audience, and his friends were always good for a laugh. Meanwhile, Emily Carter stepped off the train at her stop and made her way to the surface. She moved with purpose, her strides long and confident despite the weight of her thoughts. Unlike Jake, she couldn't shake off what had happened so easily. The slap itself hadn't hurt, it was barely more than a tap. But the disrespect behind it lingered like a bad taste in her mouth. She replayed the moment in her head, analyzing every detail. Jake's sneer, the dismissive tone of his voice, the way he had refused to take responsibility for his actions. But Emily wasn't angry, at least not yet. Instead, she felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. Who was this man, and why did he feel entitled to treat others so poorly? She wondered if he would have acted differently if he knew who she was, if he realized that slapping her arm meant slapping the wife of Vin Diesel, one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. By the time Emily reached her apartment building, she had decided not to tell her husband about the incident. Not right away, anyway. Ryan Reynolds, Dwayne Johnson, had enough on his plate without worrying about some random guy being rude on the subway. Besides, Emily prided herself on handling things independently. She wasn't the type to run to her husband every time someone cut her off in traffic or bumped into her at the grocery store. Still, there was something about Jake's behavior that gnawed at her. It wasn't just the slap. It was the arrogance, the sense of superiority that seemed to radiate off him like heat from pavement on a summer day. Emily couldn't let it go completely, so she did what many people do when they're processing an unsettling experience. She posted about it online. Using her rarely updated social media account, Emily typed out a brief description of the encounter. She kept it vague, referring to Jake only as a guy on the train and omitting any identifying details. She didn't mention Ryan or drop hints about her famous last name. Her post was simple and straightforward, written in the same calm tone she used when speaking to strangers. Today, I was standing on the subway when a man bumped into me. When I pointed out that he should be more careful, he got defensive and ended up slapping my arm. No big deal, but it reminded me how important it is to treat others with kindness, even in stressful situations. She hit send and closed the app, thinking nothing more of it. After all, her account had fewer than 500 followers, most of whom were close friends or family members. She assumed the post would disappear into the void of the internet within hours, forgotten by everyone except maybe a handful of people who liked her photos of sunsets and cats. But fate had other plans. Back at the bar, Jake was holding court, at his usual table, surrounded by his friends. He leaned back in his chair, a beer in one hand and a smug grin on his face. His audience listened intently as he recounted the events of the day, embellishing certain parts for dramatic effect. "So, there I am minding my own business," Jake began, gesturing wildly with his free hand. "This woman bumps into me, no apology, nothing. So I call her out on it, right? And instead of owning up to her mistake, she starts giving me attitude. Can you believe that?" His friends nodded along, though none of them looked particularly convinced. Some sipped their drinks in silence while others exchanged skeptical glances. Jake didn't notice, or chose to ignore the lack of enthusiasm. He was too busy building up to the climax of his story. "And then," he continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "she tries to intimidate me. Like seriously, this woman thinks she can stare me down or something. So I slap her arm, not hard, just enough to make a point. Show her who's boss." A few heads turned in his direction, eyebrows raised. One of his friends, a quiet guy named Chris, cleared his throat nervously. Are you sure that was a good idea? I mean, slapping someone, that's kind of extreme." Jake waved him off dismissively. "Relax, man. It's not like I punched her or anything. Besides, she probably deserved it. People need to learn how to act in public." Chris opened his mouth to respond but thought better of it. Instead, he took a sip of his drink and glanced at the others, silently pleading for backup. Another friend, Lisa, chimed in hesitantly. "Yeah, but still, you never know who someone might be. What if she's like super famous or something?" Jake burst out laughing, the sound loud and obnoxious. "Famous? Please. Trust me, she didn't look famous. Just some random lady. Trying to start trouble." Lisa shrugged, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press the issue further. The group lapsed into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations from nearby tables. Unbeknownst to Jake, however, his words were about to come back to haunt him. Later that night, as Emily settled into bed with a book, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was just another spam message or notification from an app she rarely used. But when the buzzing persisted, she picked it up curiously and unlocked the screen. Her eyes widened in surprise as she scrolled through the flood of notifications pouring in. Her seemingly innocuous post had gone viral, shared thousands of times, across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from strangers, expressing outrage on her behalf and condemning the man who had slapped her. Some praised her for staying calm and composed. Others demanded justice, urging her to report the incident to authorities. But what really caught Emily's attention was a comment from someone who claimed to recognize her. The user wrote, "Wait a minute. Isn't this Vin Diesel's wife?" Emily stared at the screen, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected anyone to connect the dots, especially since she had deliberately avoided mentioning Ryan in her post. But now, her carefully guarded privacy was crumbling under the weight of speculation. Within minutes, the theory gained traction, spreading like wildfire among fans and gossip blogs alike. Feeling a mix of amusement and apprehension, Emily showed the post to Ryan, who was lounging on the couch watching TV. He raised an eyebrow as he read it, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, chuckling softly, "looks like your little train ride has turned into quite the story." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to vent, Now it feels like everyone's watching us." Ryan set aside the remote and pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Hey, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out together. Besides." His voice grew firmer, tinged with protective resolve. "If this guy really thinks he can get away with treating you like that, he's got another thing coming." Emily rested her head against his chest, feeling a sense of comfort wash over her. She knew Ryan wouldn't let the matter rest. Not entirely. But for now, she was content to leave things as they were, trusting that karma, and perhaps a little help from her husband, would take care of the rest. Part 3. Jake woke up the next morning with a pounding headache. The night before had been a blur of loud music, cheap beer, and endless rounds of storytelling at the bar. He groaned as he reached for his phone on the bedside table, squinting against the bright light of the screen. For a moment, he forgot why he even picked it up. Then the notifications hit him like a freight train. His phone buzzed incessantly, vibrating so hard it nearly slid off the table. Jake unlocked it, expecting to see the usual spam messages or updates from social media apps. Instead, his screen was flooded with tags, comments, and direct messages. At first, he thought it was some kind of glitch. Who could possibly care about his life enough to send him hundreds of notifications? But as he scrolled through the chaos, the truth began to sink in. Someone had posted about the subway incident online, and it wasn't just any post. It was Emily's post, the one she had written casually the night before. Somehow it had gone viral, spreading across platforms faster than Jake could comprehend. Strangers were calling him out by name, accusing him of being rude, aggressive, and downright cruel. Worse still, the post had sparked a wave of speculation about Emily's identity. Jake's stomach churned as he read comment after comment. "Is this guy serious?" one user wrote. "He actually slapped her? What a jerk." Another added, "I hope this woman presses charges. No one deserves to be treated like that." And then there were the ones that made his blood run cold. "Wait, isn't she Vin Diesel's wife?" At first, Jake laughed nervously, dismissing the idea as absurd. There was no way the quiet, unassuming woman from the train could be married to someone like Vin Diesel. That kind of coincidence only happened in movies, or so he told himself. But as more people chimed in, sharing blurry photos and making connections, doubt crept into his mind. What if they were right? What if he really had slapped the wife of one of the most famous action stars in the world? Panic set in quickly. Jake scrambled out of bed, pacing back and forth in his tiny apartment as he tried to piece together what had happened. He replayed the events of the previous day in his head, searching for clues he might have missed. Had Emily said anything unusual? Did she wear expensive clothes or jewelry? No, nothing stood out. She had seemed completely ordinary, just another face in the crowd. But now, ordinary didn't feel like an option anymore. Jake's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Would Vin Diesel track him down and confront him? Would there be legal consequences? Or worse, would the internet turn him into a meme, forever remembered as the idiot who messed with the wrong person? Desperate to do something, anything, Jake grabbed his laptop and opened a search engine. He typed in keywords like subway slap incident and Vin Diesel wife, scrolling through article after article until his eyes burned. Every headline seemed to mock him. Man slaps woman on train, then learns she's married to Hollywood. Star, karma strikes again, bully gets burned. Public outcry over subway assault. The more he read, the more trapped he felt. His attempts to defend himself sounded hollow even to his own ears. It wasn't a big deal, he muttered under his breath, though no one was around to hear him. I barely touched her. People are blowing this way out of proportion. Still, Jake knew he couldn't ignore the situation. The internet never forgot, and neither did its users. If he wanted any chance of salvaging his reputation, he needed to act fast. By midday, Jake had formulated a plan, or at least what passed for a plan in his panicked state. He decided to reach out to local news outlets and influencers, hoping to spin the narrative in his favor. He crafted a carefully worded apology, emphasizing how sorry he was for his actions and how much he regretted causing distress. He even threw in a few buzzwords like accountability and growth to sound sincere. I want to take responsibility for my behavior, Jake said in a video he recorded on his phone. He sat in front of a plain white wall wearing a button-up shirt and trying his best to look contrite. What I did on the train was wrong, and I deeply apologize to the woman involved. I hope she can find it in her heart to forgive me. This video was shaky and poorly lit, but Jake posted it anyway, tagging every relevant account he could think of. He also sent emails to journalists, attaching the clip and begging them to share his side of the story. Please, he wrote in one message, I'm not a bad person. I just made a mistake. But the response wasn't what he expected. Instead of sympathy, Jake received ridicule. Viewers called his apology insincere, pointing out how stiff and rehearsed he sounded. Others accused him of trying to manipulate public opinion rather than genuinely owning up to his actions. One commenter summed it up perfectly. "This guy thinks saying sorry will magically fix everything. Newsflash, it doesn't work that way." As the backlash intensified, Jake's anxiety spiraled out of control. He stopped eating, barely slept, and spent hours glued to his phone, obsessively refreshing social media feeds. Each new insult or criticism felt like a punch to the gut. Memes featuring his face began circulating online, accompanied by captions, like "when you mess with the wrong person" and "karma's favorite snack." Even his co-workers avoided him at the office, pretending not to notice when he walked by. For the first time in his life, Jake felt truly powerless. He had always prided himself on his confidence and ability to dominate any situation. Now he was drowning in a sea of judgment, unable to escape the consequences of his own arrogance. Meanwhile, Ryan Reynolds, Dwayne Johnson, watched the drama unfold from the comfort of his home. He wasn't actively following the news or scrolling through social media, but it was impossible to miss the headlines. Fans tagged him in posts, urging him to step in and defend Emily. Journalists called his agent, asking for statements or exclusive interviews. The entire ordeal threatened to disrupt the peaceful anonymity Ryan and Emily cherished. At first, Ryan tried to brush it off. He trusted Emily's decision to handle things her way, respecting her desire to avoid escalating the situation. But, as the days passed and Jake's antics grew increasingly desperate, Ryan found it harder to stay neutral. He hated seeing his wife dragged into the spotlight because of someone else's selfishness. More than that, he couldn't ignore the underlying message behind Jake's behavior, that women should tolerate disrespect without complaint. One evening, as Ryan and Emily sat together on the couch, he finally spoke up. "You know," he said, gently, "this guy doesn't deserve your silence. He needs to understand what he did wrong and maybe learn a lesson while he's at it." Emily looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "What are you suggesting?" Ryan leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "I'm not talking about revenge or violence. I'm talking about having a conversation with him. Face to face. Let him explain himself and then explain to him why his actions were unacceptable." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You really think that's going to work? He doesn't strike me as the type to listen." Ryan smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but sometimes people surprise us. Besides, it's worth a shot. If nothing else, it'll give him a chance to reflect on what he's done." After a moment of hesitation, Emily nodded. "Okay, if you think it'll help, I trust you." With that, Ryan picked up his phone and sent a private message to Jake through one of his social media accounts. The message was brief and to the point. "Let's talk. No cameras, no reporters, just you and me." Jake nearly dropped his phone when he saw the notification. His hands trembled as he opened the message, reading it over and over again to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Vin Diesel. The Vin Diesel wanted to meet with him? In person? For a moment, Jake considered ignoring the request. What could he possibly say to someone like Ryan? How could he justify his actions to a man who commanded respect wherever he went? But deep down, Jake knew he didn't have a choice. This was his opportunity to make things right, or at least try. Taking a deep breath, he replied, "Okay. Where and when?" Ryan responded almost immediately, providing details for a meeting at a quiet gymnasium late that night. Jake stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He had no idea what to expect, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change forever. Part 4. The night was cool and quiet, the kind of evening where the world seemed to slow down just a little. Jake Miller stood outside the gymnasium, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He glanced around nervously, half expecting paparazzi or angry fans to jump out of the shadows. But the street was empty, save for the occasional car driving by. The only sound was the faint hum of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Jake hesitated at the door, his heart pounding like a drum. He had spent hours rehearsing what he would say to Ryan Reynolds, Dwayne Johnson, practicing apologies and explanations until his throat was sore. Yet now, standing on the threshold, he felt completely unprepared. What could he possibly say to a man like Ryan? Would Ryan even give him a chance to speak, or would he dismiss Jake outright? Taking a shaky breath, Jake pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. The gymnasium was dimly lit, its fluorescent lights flickering softly overhead. The air smelled faintly of sweat and polish, remnants of countless basketball games and wrestling matches. In the center of the room stood Ryan, dressed casually in a gray hoodie and sweatpants. His arms were crossed, but his expression was calm, not angry, not intimidating, just neutral. "Thanks for coming," Ryan said, his voice deep and steady. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, filling the space between them like an invisible force. Jake swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah, thanks for reaching out." The words came out awkward and stilted, but Ryan didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't let it show. Ryan gestured toward a pair of folding chairs set up near the edge of the court. "Let's sit down. We've got a lot to talk about." Jake nodded and followed him, his legs feeling like jelly beneath him. He sank into one of the chairs, gripping the edges tightly as if afraid he might fall off. Ryan sat across from him, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until Jake couldn't take it anymore. "I'm really sorry," he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in their rush to escape. "I didn't mean to hurt your wife, I mean Emily. I didn't know who she was, and I shouldn't have reacted the way I did. I'm so sorry." Ryan listened without interrupting, his gaze steady and unwavering. When Jake finally ran out of steam, slumping back in his chair with a defeated sigh, Ryan leaned back slightly and nodded. "Okay," he said simply. "That's a start." Jake blinked, unsure how to respond. Start?" Ryan smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Apologizing is important, but it's not enough. Words are easy. Actions are what matter, so tell me, why did you do it? Why did you slap her?" Jake opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He hadn't expected this question, not so directly. He fidgeted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously against the armrests. I don't know. I guess I was frustrated. The train was crowded and she bumped into me and I thought she was being rude. I wasn't thinking straight." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "So you lashed out because you were frustrated?" "Well, yeah," Jake admitted reluctantly. "But it wasn't personal. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to back off." Ryan nodded slowly, digesting Jake's words. "Do you realize how dangerous that mindset is? Acting on impulse when you're upset can lead to serious consequences. You're lucky Emily is the kind of person who chooses peace over conflict. Not everyone would have handled it the way she did." Jake flinched at the reminder, guilt twisting in his chest like a knife. "I know. Trust me. I've been beating myself up over it ever since. I never meant for any of this to happen." "I believe you," Ryan said, surprising Jake with the sincerity in his tone. "You're not a bad guy, Jake. You're just lost. A lot of people are. They let anger or fear control their actions instead of taking a step back and thinking things through." Jake stared at him, stunned. This wasn't what he had expected. He had braced himself for yelling, threats, maybe even physical confrontation. Instead, Ryan was speaking to him like a mentor, offering guidance rather than punishment. "I grew up in a tough neighborhood," Ryan continued, his voice softer now. "I've seen what happens when people act without considering the impact of their choices. I've made mistakes too, big ones, but I learned from them, and that's what I want for you." Jake felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly, embarrassed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ryan said, leaning forward again, "that you have a choice. You can keep making excuses for your behavior, or you can use this experience as a wake-up call. Start treating others with respect even when you're stressed or upset. Learn to listen instead of reacting. Be better than the version of yourself that walked onto that train." Jake nodded slowly, absorbing Ryan's words. I want to change. I really do. But how do I even begin? Ryan smiled, a genuine smile this time. One step at a time. Start small. Apologize to the people you've wronged. Really apologize, not just to save face. Volunteer in your community. Find ways to help others instead of hurting them. And most importantly, hold yourself accountable. No one else can do that for you. For the first time in days, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny spark in the darkness. Thank you, he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you. Ryan stood up, extending a hand. You don't need my forgiveness, Jake. You need your own. Work on that, and everything else will fall into place. Jake hesitated for a moment before shaking Ryan's hand. The grip was firm but not overpowering, a gesture of strength and support rather than dominance. As they parted ways, Jake felt lighter somehow, as if a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. On the drive home, Jake replayed the conversation in his head, marveling at how different it had been from anything he'd imagined. Ryan hadn't yelled or threatened him. He hadn't demanded restitution or revenge. Instead, he had treated Jake like a human being, flawed and imperfect, but capable of growth. That simple act of kindness meant more to Jake than any amount of money or fame ever could. When he arrived home, Jake poured himself a glass of water and sat down at his kitchen table. For the first time in weeks, his phone remained silent. There were no notifications, no angry messages, no reminders of the chaos he had caused. Just quiet. He pulled out a notebook and began writing. First a list of names, then notes about specific incidents. People he had insulted, arguments he had started, moments when he had let his temper get the best of him. Each entry was accompanied by a plan, an apology, a promise to do better, a commitment to change. It wouldn't be easy, Jake knew that. Changing habits formed over years would take time and effort. But for the first time in his life, he felt motivated to try. Maybe he couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future, and that was enough. Part 5. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a rhythm for everyone involved. The viral storm surrounding the subway incident had faded, replaced by new headlines and fleeting trends that captured the internet's attention. But for Jake Miller, the aftermath of that night in the gymnasium lingered, not as a burden but as a quiet reminder of the promise he had made to himself and to Ryan Reynolds, Dwayne Johnson. He wasn't the same man who had walked onto that crowded train months ago, quick to anger and slow to think. Something inside him had shifted, and though change didn't happen overnight, it was happening. Jake started small. He began volunteering at a local community center, helping kids with their homework and organizing after-school activities. At first, he was hesitant. What could someone like him possibly offer? But the children responded to his energy, drawn to his jokes and stories about growing up in the city. They didn't care about his past mistakes. They saw only the present Jake, the one who showed up every week with a smile and a willingness to help. One afternoon, as Jake sat on the floor of the rec room playing board games with a group of giggling kids, he realized something important. He wasn't doing this because he wanted redemption or approval from others. He was doing it because it felt good. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making a difference, even if it was just in the lives of a handful of children. Word spread quickly among the staff and parents at the community center. Some were skeptical at first, having seen Jake's face plastered across social media during the height of the scandal. But over time, they came to trust him, recognizing the sincerity in his actions. A few even approached him privately, thanking him for stepping up and being a role model for the younger generation. Jake didn't shy away from talking about his past when asked. In fact, he welcomed the opportunity to share his story. During one particularly memorable session, he stood in front of a group of teenagers and admitted everything: the subway incident, the slap, the viral fallout. His voice wavered at times, but he kept going, determined to be honest. I messed up, he told them. looking each teenager in the eye. I let my emotions control me, and I hurt someone I didn't even know. It was stupid, selfish, and wrong. But here's the thing. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. You can either let your mistakes define you, or you can use them as a chance to grow. The room was silent when he finished, the teenagers staring at him with expressions ranging from surprise to admiration. One boy raised his hand hesitantly. "What if people don't forgive you?" he asked. "What if they keep holding it against you?" Jake smiled softly, remembering Ryan's words. "Not everyone will forgive you, and that's okay. Forgiveness starts with yourself. If you truly want to change, focus on becoming the person you want to be, not the person other people expect you to be." Emily Carter noticed the shift too, though indirectly. She hadn't seen Jake since that day on the train, nor did she actively seek updates about his life. But occasionally, snippets of information would reach her. A friend mentioning a news article about Jake's volunteer work, a co-worker sharing a photo of him leading a youth basketball clinic. Each tidbit reinforced her belief that people were capable of growth, given the right motivation and support. Ryan, meanwhile, followed Jake's progress quietly, keeping tabs through mutual acquaintances and online posts. He never reached out again after their meeting in the gymnasium, trusting that Jake would take his advice to heart. When Emily mentioned Jake's transformation one evening over dinner, Ryan simply nodded. "People underestimate the power of kindness," he said, cutting into his steak. "It doesn't cost anything, but it can change everything." Emily smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "You're pretty amazing, you know that?" Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, I'm just a guy who believes in second chances. Everyone deserves one, including Jake." As the weeks turned into months, Jake continued to challenge himself. He enrolled in anger management classes, not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to understand his triggers and learn healthier ways to cope. He read books about empathy and emotional intelligence, highlighting passages that resonated with him. Slowly but surely, he began to see the world, and the people in it, through a different lens. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Jake stumbled upon a post from Emily. It was a simple photo of her and Ryan attending a charity event, accompanied by a caption thanking supporters for their generosity. Jake stared at the image for a long time, his chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and regret. He owed so much of his journey to her husband's wisdom and compassion, yet he had never properly thanked her. Summoning his courage, Jake sent a private message to Emily's account. "Hi, Emily," he wrote. "I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. Meeting Ryan changed my life in ways I never expected. I'll always be grateful for that." To his surprise, Emily replied almost immediately. "You're welcome, Jake. I'm glad things are working out for you. Keep going, you've got this." Her words brought tears to his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was close enough. And for Jake, that was more than enough. A year later, Jake found himself sitting in a movie theater, surrounded by strangers eagerly waiting for the latest blockbuster to begin. The screen flickered to life, casting a glow over the darkened room. As the opening credits rolled, Jake recognized Ryan's name listed among the cast. A grin spread across his face as he settled back into his seat, popcorn in hand. For a brief moment, he thought about the events that had led him here. The subway, the slap, the apology, the lessons learned. It had been a difficult journey, filled with moments of doubt and self-reflection, but it had also been rewarding in ways he couldn't have imagined. When Ryan's character appeared on screen, delivering a powerful line about resilience and second chances, Jake felt a surge of pride. Not because he knew the actor personally, but because he understood the message behind the words. Life was messy, complicated, and unpredictable, but it was also full of opportunities to start over. As the movie ended and the lights came back on, Jake lingered in his seat for a moment, savoring the experience. Then, with a deep breath, he stood up and joined the crowd filing out of the theater. Outside, the city buzzed with energy, its streets alive with possibility. Jake stepped into the flow of pedestrians, feeling lighter than he had in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he was excited to find out.